The village of Grayswood had always been a place shrouded in mystery, nestled deep within the dense forests of northern Europe. It was the kind of place that outsiders would visit only when they had no other choice, and even then they would leave with a sense of unease clinging to them. The village, forgotten by most, stood as a relic of a bygone era. The twisted trees that surrounded it seemed to whisper old secrets on the wind, and the crumbling houses, with their sagging roofs and cracked windows, spoke of a time when the village was full of life. But those days had long since passed, and now the streets were deserted, save for a few brave souls who had made Grayswood their home. On the night of the full moon something was different. The moon hung heavy in the sky, casting a sickly light over the village. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the stillness that usually permeated the village had been replaced by a strange tension. It was a tension that seemed to hum in the air, the kind that made every movement feel like a betrayal. As the clock struck midnight, the first drop fell. It was small, almost imperceptible at first, but it was enough to catch the attention of those who still dared to stay in Grayswood. The villagers peered out from behind their windows, their eyes wide with fear as they watched the drops fall from the sky. The rain that had begun as a trickle quickly grew into a downpour, and with each drop, the air seemed to grow thicker, heavier. But it was not water that fell from the sky. The blood-red rain splattered onto the cobblestone streets, staining them like a cruel reminder of something ancient and forgotten. The droplets glistened like rubies in the moonlight, casting eerie shadows against the decaying buildings. The villagers trembled in their homes, some praying, others cowering in fear, but no one dared to step outside. In the heart of the village, the old church stood silent and unmoving, its doors locked tight, as if it too feared the horrors that the rain heralded. The villagers knew all too well what the blood rain meant. It was a curse, a punishment for sins long past, a curse that had been passed down through generations. As the rain continued to fall, the villagers felt a strange sensation creeping over them, like a fever that burned deep within their bones. At first it was subtle, a slight dizziness, a heavy feeling in the chest, but soon it became impossible to ignore. The sickness spread through the village like wildfire, infecting one soul after another. It started with the children. They were the first to succumb to the strange illness, their eyes growing wild and feral as the fever took hold of them. The parents tried to comfort them, but it was no use. The fever turned them into something else, something unrecognizable. Their skin became pale, their veins dark and swollen, and their once innocent faces twisted into grotesque masks of hunger and thirst. They no longer looked like children, they looked like monsters. The transformation spread rapidly, infecting the adults in the village as well. Those who were once kind and gentle now wandered the streets, their eyes glowing with a hunger that could not be satisfied. The villagers had become beasts, driven by an insatiable thirst for blood. No one was safe. No one was spared. And still the blood rain fell. Far away in a distant town, a group of strangers had heard rumors of the strange happenings in Grayswood. They were a mix of journalists, adventurers, and curious souls, drawn by the mystery and the whispers of a curse that had lingered in the village for centuries. They had come to uncover the truth, to see for themselves what had caused the blood rain and the transformation of the villagers. But as they entered the village, they were met with silence. The streets were empty, the houses boarded up, and the air felt thick with the weight of something terrible. They had no idea what they were walking into. "Do you hear that?" one of them asked, his voice trembling. They all stopped in their tracks, straining to listen. At first, there was nothing but the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. But then faintly they heard it, whispers. A low, guttural sound like something, or someone, was trying to speak to them from the shadows. They turned toward the old church, its spire looming over the village like a silent sentinel. It was there, in the darkness, that they could feel the presence of something ancient and powerful. "What is this place?" another one asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. Before anyone could answer, the first drop of blood rain fell on their faces, cold and sticky, as if the very sky was weeping for what had been done. And with that drop, they knew that their arrival had not been a coincidence. The curse had waited for them. And now it was too late to turn back. The blood rain continued to fall, relentless and unforgiving, as the group of strangers made their way deeper into the heart of Grayswood. Each drop that splattered onto their skin seemed to burn, leaving behind a cold, searing sensation. They pulled their collars up, trying to shield themselves from the downpour, but it was no use. It soaked through their clothes, clinging to their bodies like an invisible force. The village felt like a graveyard. The air was thick with a stench of decay, and the once vibrant homes now stood like hollowed-out shells, their windows dark and lifeless. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of their footsteps as they ventured through the streets, their faces drawn with a mix of confusion and fear. "Why are we still here?" murmured Elena, a young journalist with a passion for uncovering the truth, her voice trembling. She had grown up in the shadow of stories of curses and ancient rites, but this was beyond anything she had ever imagined. "We need to understand what's happening here," replied Thomas, an archaeologist with a deep interest in ancient lore. His eyes were wide, scanning the surroundings as if searching for any clue that could explain the horrors unfolding before them. "There's something ancient about this place. This curse, it's not just coincidence." They stopped in front of an old, weathered building, the only one that seemed to have some life left in it. The door was cracked slightly open, the hinges groaning as though something or someone had tried to force their way inside. Thomas motioned for the others to follow him as he pushed the door open with caution. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of damp wood and mildew. The dim light from their lanterns flickered and danced across the room, revealing rows of old shelves lined with dusty books and papers. It was a library of sorts, filled with the remnants of the village's past. But it wasn't the books that caught their attention, it was the symbols etched into the walls. "Look at this," Thomas whispered, running his fingers over the crude carvings. The symbols were familiar, resembling runes he had seen in ancient texts, runes that were said to summon spirits, to call upon powers from beyond the grave. But these were different. They seemed alive, pulsating with an energy he couldn't quite understand. "Do you think these symbols are connected to the curse?" asked Elena, her voice low as she stepped closer to inspect them. "I'm sure of it," Thomas replied, his brow furrowing. "These are the marks of an old ritual, a binding spell. It's possible that the rain is part of the curse, the blood rain. It's a sign, a way for whatever force is at work here to take hold of the village. The more it rains, the stronger the curse becomes." The others gathered around, trying to make sense of the symbols. But before they could discuss it further, a chilling noise echoed through the room, a soft, unnatural growl. The group froze, their eyes darting around, trying to pinpoint the source of the sound. "Did you hear that?" whispered Alex, a former soldier and the most level-headed member of the group. "Stay quiet," Thomas said, his voice steady but laced with urgency. "There's something here. Something that doesn't want us to uncover the truth." Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind them, the heavy wooden door crashing against the wall with a force that rattled the room. The group spun around, hearts pounding in their chests, but there was nothing there, nothing except the creeping shadows that seemed to stretch unnaturally across the room. "Who's there?" called out Elena, her voice cracking with fear. No answer came. But then, from the darkness, they saw it, a figure crouched low in the corner of the room, its face obscured by a matted mess of hair. It was a woman, or what had once been a woman. Her skin was pale, nearly translucent, and her eyes glowed with an unnatural, bloodshot light. Her mouth was open, revealing rows of sharp, yellowed teeth, and her fingers twitched as if longing to tear into something, anything. The woman's head snapped toward them with a disturbing speed, her eyes locking onto theirs. A low hiss escaped her lips, like the sound of a snake preparing to strike. "She's one of them," Elena gasped, taking a step back. Before they could react, the woman let out a guttural scream, a blood-curdling sound that echoed through the library and charged at them. But just as quickly as she had moved, the room seemed to shift and she was gone. The door behind them swung open once again, as if pushed by an invisible hand. The group stood frozen, their breaths shallow, their hearts racing. What they had just witnessed was impossible, a nightmare brought to life. "We need to leave. Now," Thomas said, his voice filled with urgency. He turned toward the door, but before he could take another step, they heard the sound of footsteps, heavy, deliberate steps, coming from the hallway outside. The blood rain continued to fall outside, but inside, there was no escape from the nightmare that had taken hold of Grayswood. As they moved cautiously toward the door, the whispers returned, low, guttural sounds that seemed to come from all directions, murmuring in a language they didn't understand. It was as though the very air around them was alive, pressing in on them, suffocating them. "What do we do now?" Alex asked, his voice filled with dread. "We find the source of this curse," Thomas replied, his tone resolute. "And we stop it before it consumes us all." But as they stepped out into the rain-soaked streets, they knew that finding the source would not be easy. Grayswood was no ordinary village, it was a place where the past never truly died, and the darkness that lurked in its shadows was far older, far more powerful than they could ever imagine. And it was hungry. The rain hadn't stopped. The blood rain fell like a constant, oppressive weight, the crimson droplets now thick and cloying, turning the streets into a sickening river of red. The group of strangers, Thomas, Elena, Alex and the rest, stood beneath the dilapidated awning of the library, their faces pale, their eyes wide with fear. The horrific figure they had seen inside the building had vanished as quickly as it had appeared, but the terror it had left behind lingered in the air, suffocating them. "We can't stay here," Thomas said, his voice tense. "Whatever is happening to this place, it's spreading. We need to find out where it's coming from." Elena nodded, wiping the blood rain from her face with trembling hands. "But how? The village is abandoned, almost everyone's gone or changed. And what was that thing in there?" Her voice faltered as she spoke, her mind struggling to process the monstrous sight they had just witnessed. Alex clenched his fists, frustration and fear warring within him. "We need answers. We need to find someone who's still sane, someone who knows what's happening here." "There's the old mine," Thomas said suddenly, his eyes narrowing as a memory surfaced. "It's a place the villagers used to talk about. It's said to be haunted, and there are rumors that it's tied to the curse. I think that's where the blood rain is coming from, where it all started." The group exchanged uneasy glances, but there was no time to argue. They were running out of options. The village was decaying around them, the rain relentless, and the madness that gripped the villagers was spreading. If they didn't act quickly, they might not make it out alive. "Let's go then," Alex said, the determination in his voice cutting through the fear. "We don't have any other choice." They turned and began to make their way through the village, their steps heavy and deliberate, as if the very ground beneath them were conspiring to keep them from moving forward. The streets were eerily quiet, save for the distant sound of creaking wood and the low murmur of the wind. But they could feel the eyes of the village upon them, shadowed figures watching from behind broken windows, their gazes cold and empty. The old mine was on the outskirts of Grayswood, a place none of the villagers dared to go. Over the years, it had fallen into disrepair, its entrance now little more than a crumbling shaft in the earth, surrounded by twisted trees and overgrown vines. But there was something that drew them to it, a pull they couldn't explain. As they neared the mine, the air grew heavier, the blood rain becoming more suffocating, as though the rain itself was warning them to turn back. The mine's entrance loomed ahead, an uninviting darkness that seemed to swallow the light from their lanterns. "We need to go in," Thomas said quietly, his voice resolute. "Whatever is down there, we'll find the answers." With a shared, silent agreement, they stepped forward, the wooden beams of the mine's entrance groaning in protest as they passed beneath them. The air inside was cold and musty, the scent of earth and decay filling their nostrils. The walls of the mine were rough-hewn, the uneven stone illuminated only by the flickering light of their lanterns. "Stay close," Thomas ordered, his voice low. "We don't know what's down here." They moved cautiously through the winding tunnels, the sound of their footsteps muffled by the thick layers of dust that had settled on the ground. The walls seemed to close in around them, the tunnel narrowing with each step they took. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the air became, the darkness pressing against them, suffocating. It was Elena who noticed it first, the strange markings on the walls. At first, they had assumed they were simply the remnants of the mine's past, the graffiti of long-forgotten miners. But as they drew closer, they realized the markings were not random at all. They were symbols, ancient symbols carved into the stone with a precision that suggested they were not made by human hands. "These symbols," Elena whispered, tracing one with her finger. "They're the same ones from the library. The ones we saw on the walls." Thomas's face darkened as he stepped closer to inspect the carvings. "This is it. This is where the curse began. These symbols, they're part of a ritual, a binding spell. It's not just the blood rain, it's a prison for something that was meant to be locked away." "Something dark?" Alex asked, his voice barely audible in the silence. Thomas nodded gravely. "Yes, something ancient. And it's been waiting. The blood rain is the signal, the sign that it's awakening." The air around them seemed to thrum with a low, vibrating hum, the very stone of the mine seeming to pulse with the energy of something old and powerful. As they continued deeper into the mine, the atmosphere grew heavier, the darkness almost alive, suffocating them with its weight. Finally, they reached a large chamber at the end of the tunnel, the walls of which were covered in more symbols, more markings, each one more intricate than the last. In the center of the room stood a massive stone altar, covered in dust and age, but unmistakable in its design. On top of the altar lay a dark, obsidian stone, its surface gleaming with an unnatural sheen. "That's it," Thomas whispered, his breath shallow. "The heart of the curse." Suddenly, a low growl echoed through the chamber, sending a chill down their spines. The sound grew louder, closer, and then from the shadows they saw it, Figures emerging from the darkness, their twisted forms barely human, their eyes glowing red with hunger. The villagers, now little more than monsters, had followed them. The blood rain had brought them to the edge of madness, and now they would make sure no one left the mine alive. The creatures moved toward them with terrifying speed, their twisted bodies sliding from the shadows like specters of nightmares. Their faces were gaunt and pale, the skin pulled taut over bones, with eyes that glowed a deep, sickly red. The air grew colder, the blood rain pounding relentlessly against the ground, as though the heavens themselves were complicit in the curse that had taken hold of Grayswood. "Get ready," Thomas shouted, drawing a small weathered knife from his belt. The blade gleamed in the dim light of the lanterns, but it seemed hopelessly small against the growing horde of monstrous villagers that surged toward them. Alex pulled out his flashlight and aimed it at the closest figure. It was a woman, once beautiful, now reduced to something grotesque. Her eyes locked onto his and her mouth opened, revealing jagged teeth stained with blood. "Stay back," Alex yelled, but the words barely registered before the woman lunged forward, her claws swiping through the air. He barely had time to react, bringing up his flashlight to deflect the blow. The creature screeched in pain but didn't stop. It was as if the blood rain had stripped them of any humanity, turning them into mindless predators, driven only by their hunger. The others scrambled backward, but the creatures closed in from all sides, cutting off any hope of escape. Elena's heart raced, her breath quick and shallow as she scanned the chamber, looking for any way out. But the walls were solid stone, the only exit the narrow tunnel they had come through, and it was already blocked by several of the cursed villagers. "Thomas!" she screamed, but her voice was barely audible over the cacophony of snarls and growls. Thomas was already moving, his eyes focused on the stone altar in the center of the room. The obsidian stone atop it gleamed in the dim light as if calling to him. He knew instinctively that this was the key to ending the curse. But the creatures were closing in, too many, too fast. "I'll hold them off. Get to the altar," he shouted. He lunged forward, using the knife to slash at the closest creature, but his movements were sluggish, the weight of the air pressing down on him, making each strike feel like a desperate act of futility. "Thomas, no!" Elena cried, but it was too late. The creatures were upon him. One of them, a man who had once been the village blacksmith, grabbed his arm and yanked him toward the altar with brutal strength. Thomas grunted, twisting to break free, but the man's grip was unrelenting. He could see the hunger in the blacksmith's eyes, the emptiness that replaced everything human in his expression. Elena didn't hesitate. With a strength born of fear and desperation, she ran toward the altar, her hand reaching out for the obsidian stone. As her fingers brushed its cold surface, a violent jolt of energy coursed through her body, like 1,000 icy needles piercing her veins. The air hummed with power, and for a moment, everything went still. The creatures froze, their twisted forms contorting as if some unseen force was holding them in place. Elena gasped for breath, her fingers still gripping the stone, as though it had fused with her hand. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice trembling. She could feel the pulse of the stone, beating in time with her own heart. The symbol etched into the obsidian seemed to glow brighter, its intricate lines shifting, twisting as though the stone itself was alive. Then, from the depths of the mine, a voice echoed, a voice that seemed to come from the very earth beneath their feet. It was low, guttural, and ancient, a sound that resonated deep within their bones. "Release me," the voice whispered. The ground beneath their feet trembled, and the creatures began to writhe, their bodies contorting as if in pain. Their eyes rolled back in their heads, and they let out inhuman shrieks of torment. "Elena!" Thomas shouted, pulling himself free from the blacksmith's grasp. He ran to her, his breath ragged as he reached out to pull her away from the altar. "We need to leave. Now." But Elena couldn't move. The stone had a grip on her, and though she tried to pull away, her hand remained firmly planted on the obsidian surface. The voice echoed again, louder this time, sending a wave of dread crashing over her. "Free me and I will grant you what you desire," the voice growled, more insistent now. "I will give you power, give you life in exchange for your soul." The creatures, still writhing in agony, began to regain their strength. Their eyes snapped open, glowing brighter than before, and they turned their attention toward Elena, hunger in their eyes. "No," Elena gasped, shaking her head as she tried to break free from the stone's pull. "I won't." But the stone wouldn't let go. The dark force within it was too strong, and Elena could feel her will weakening, slipping away with each passing moment. The obsidian stone seemed to feed off her fear, her desperation. It promised power, an end to the curse. But at what cost? Elena, listen to me. Thomas pleaded, his voice frantic. He grabbed her shoulders, shaking her gently. You have to let go. This thing, it's not what it seems. It's manipulating you. But Elena couldn't hear him. The voice in the stone was too loud now, drowning out all other thoughts. It called to her like a siren song, offering her a way out, offering freedom. Freedom from the blood rain. Freedom from the creatures. Freedom from the curse. But at what cost? Her grip tightened on the stone and she felt something shift within her, something ancient and malevolent. The power that had been dormant for centuries was waking, and it was hungry. A loud crash interrupted her thoughts. The chamber shook violently as the stone pulsed with an overwhelming energy. The altar cracked, the symbols glowing bright red as the air was filled with a deafening roar. The ground split open beneath their feet, and from the depths of the earth, something stirred, something far older than the curse itself. A shadow rose, black and insidious, its form shifting like smoke, twisting and writhing. The very air seemed to distort around it, warping and bending as though reality itself was unraveling. In that moment, Elena understood. The curse wasn't just about the rain. It wasn't just about the bloodthirsty villagers. It was a prison. A prison for something far worse than they had ever imagined. The shadow rose from the chasm in the earth, its form formless, an endless mass of darkness that seemed to stretch beyond the very walls of the mine. The air grew thick with the weight of it, suffocating and oppressive. Elena could feel the coldness of it seeping into her bones, chilling her heart. Her grip on the obsidian stone tightened, as if drawn by the weight of the darkness before her, yet something deep inside her resisted, her own will fighting against the lure of the stone's power. Thomas stepped forward, his face twisted with desperation. Elena, let go of it. Now. But Elena couldn't move. The stone pulsed in her hand, the symbols on its surface glowing brighter, resonating with the ancient power beneath them. The shadow before them stretched wider, filling the entire chamber. It was no longer just a shape, it was a presence, a suffocating, malevolent force that seemed to hunger for something more. From the depths of the darkness, a pair of glowing red eyes slowly appeared. They were not human, not even close. The eyes gleamed like molten lava, full of malice and hunger. They fixed on Elena with an unnatural, chilling focus. You have freed me, a voice echoed, but it wasn't from any human mouth. It reverberated through the mine's walls, the ground beneath their feet, and even into their very souls. The voice was deep and ancient, like 1,000 whispers from the void, each one as cold and empty as the shadow it emerged from. The air around them began to crackle with energy, a surge of dark power that made their skin crawl. The creatures, the villagers who had once been human, now stood motionless, their twisted faces staring at the shadow, their eyes no longer red with hunger but filled with a strange, eerie reverence. They were nothing more than empty vessels now, puppets in the hands of whatever force had risen. Elena, Thomas whispered, taking a step toward her, his voice trembling. This thing, it's not what it promised. It's not here to help you. It's here to destroy everything. We have to stop it. Elena's fingers twitched against the stone, but her body refused to respond. She was trapped, bound by the stone's dark power. The creature before her was slowly taking form, its shape becoming clearer, long spindly limbs that scraped the ground with terrible, unnatural claws. Its skin was like blackened tar, shifting and churning like liquid, as if the creature itself could not decide what it was. It had no mouth, yet its voice filled the air as if it was communicating directly to their minds. I have waited long enough, it hissed, its voice dripping with disdain. You have unleashed me and now the world will pay. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and a low, groaning sound filled the mine. The creature was growing stronger with every passing second, its presence expanding, reaching into the very earth, as though it was waking from a long, ancient slumber. The walls of the mine cracked, dust falling like ash, and the sound of grinding stone echoed through the chamber. The altar, where the obsidian stone had rested, shattered into pieces, as if the very structure of the mine was collapsing under the weight of this ancient evil. You will all serve me, the creature intoned, its red eyes narrowing as it began to move toward them. Its limbs dragged behind it, each step causing the mine to shudder with the force of its presence. You are nothing but pawns, your souls already forfeit. No, Elena gasped, shaking her head as she struggled against the stone's grip on her. Her body felt like it was being torn in two, one part of her still clinging to the stone, the other part fighting to escape, to stop the thing that had risen. She could feel her breath becoming shallow, her vision blurry, but she knew one thing. If she didn't let go of the stone, everything would be lost. The blood rain was merely the beginning, the creature continued, its voice now booming in their minds. The curse that has plagued this village for centuries is but a small offering, a tiny price to awaken me. The blood rain will continue until I have taken all that is left. There will be no escape. Your world will fall and I will reign. Elena felt a sickening wave of power surge through her. She could see the blood rain outside the mine now, heavier than ever, the sky above tainted with a sickening red hue, as if the heavens themselves were bleeding. The entire village was caught in its grip, and the twisted villagers, now little more than mindless husks, slowly began to rise, drawn by the creature's power. They shambled toward the group, their eyes empty, their movements slow and deliberate. They were no longer the villagers they had once been. They were its army. "Thomas?" Elena's voice was barely a whisper, but she could see the fear in his eyes as he reached out for her. She could feel the weight of the curse pressing on her chest, suffocating her. I can't stop it. I can't." But Thomas wasn't listening. He pulled at her with all his strength, desperately trying to break her free from the stone's grip. "You can't. Elena, fight," he shouted, his voice filled with a desperate, pleading strength. Elena felt a tear slip down her cheek. She didn't want to do this. She didn't want to be the one who unleashed this horror on the world. But the stone had bound her, had taken control, and the creature, this thing, was too powerful to fight alone. And yet, in the deepest, darkest part of her soul, Elena found a flicker of defiance. "No!" she screamed, the word tearing from her throat. "I will not be your puppet." With a sudden surge of energy, she pulled her hand from the obsidian stone. The darkness within it screamed, but Elena pushed through the pain, shoving the stone away from her. It was as if the earth itself shook in response. The creature before them roared in fury, its shadowy form twisting and writhing, enraged by the defiance it had encountered. But it wasn't enough. The mine continued to quake, the walls closing in. The shadows surged forward, and Elena knew they were running out of time. "Thomas," she gasped, her voice full of determination. "We need to destroy it. Destroy the stone. It's the only way to stop it." But before Thomas could respond, the ground beneath their feet cracked wide open, swallowing them whole. The darkness was upon them, pulling them into the depths of the mine, and Elena could feel the cold grip of the creature's power wrapping around her once more. The battle for Grayswood was just beginning. The ground had swallowed them whole. Elena's world had gone black. She could no longer see or hear. It felt as though time had stopped, leaving her suspended in nothingness. But beneath the darkness there was a feeling, an oppressive, insidious pull, as though the creature's very essence was clawing at her from the depths of the earth. She couldn't breathe. The air was thick, suffocating, laden with the stench of decay and ancient evil. Her chest tightened, panic rising within her. She had to move, had to escape, but her limbs refused to obey. It was as if the earth itself had shackled her, holding her down. Then through the darkness she heard a voice. "Elena." It was faint at first, a whisper almost drowned out by the oppressive weight surrounding her. But as it grew louder she recognized it. It was Thomas. "Elena." Her eyes snapped open, her breath catching as she realized she was no longer alone. Thomas was beside her, his face pale, his eyes wide with fear. He was reaching out to her, his hand trembling. "Elena, you have to fight it. We can still stop this." His voice was filled with urgency. The creature had not given up. Its power had found a way to sink its claws into the very fabric of the earth, of the village, of their souls. It was everywhere, its presence suffusing the very air, the walls, the ground. Elena turned toward the dark void around them. She could sense it, the looming threat, the shadow that was more than a creature. It was an ancient malevolence that had been waiting for centuries, hidden deep beneath the earth. It was now free, and it would not stop until it had consumed everything. The obsidian stone, shattered and forgotten, lay somewhere in the depths. But the curse it carried was still alive. And so was the creature. "Elena," Thomas said again, his voice softer now, filled with something almost desperate. "You were chosen. Not by the curse but by something else. Something stronger. You have the power to stop it." She shook her head, her mind racing. She had no power. She was just a woman who had walked into a forgotten village and stumbled upon a nightmare that had been brewing for centuries. What could she possibly do to stop something so ancient, so terrible? "You have to remember," Thomas continued, his hand gripping hers. "There is always a balance. Light and darkness. Life and death. The blood rain was a part of it. But you, Elena, you can tip the scale. You can end it." The weight of his words crashed into her. She had always thought that the stone was the key, that the power it held could solve everything. But now she understood, it wasn't about the stone. It was about choice. It was about sacrifice. The shadow, the creature, it was a part of the curse. But the curse had already been fulfilled. The rain had fallen. The blood had been spilled. Now Elena had a chance to stop it all. But it meant giving up everything. Her freedom. Her life. Her very soul. The ground beneath them trembled once again, and the creature's roar echoed from the depths, shaking the very foundations of the mine. Elena closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision press against her chest like a stone. It wasn't just about saving Grayswood. It was about saving the world from the curse that had lingered for so long. She had been the one to wake it, and she would be the one to end it. With a final, quiet breath, Elena made her choice. She stood. The dark presence around her shuddered as she rose, and for a moment, everything felt still. The blood rain outside ceased, the thunderous roar of the creature faltered. "Elena," Thomas whispered, but she didn't turn to look at him. She had already made the sacrifice. She could feel the darkness withdrawing, its presence fading. It was pulling away as if the weight of her resolve had shattered its grip on the world. But even as the creature's shadow retreated, Elena felt her strength draining. She was giving everything, her will, her soul, to destroy it. The ground beneath her began to crumble once more, but this time, it wasn't the creature doing the damage. It was the power of her choice, unraveling the very curse that had been woven for centuries. As the darkness around them faded, the blood rain ceased, and the storm above Grayswood slowly abated. The curse had broken. The village was free. But Elena knew that it had come at a great cost. The last thing she saw was Thomas, his face filled with sorrow and understanding. Then, in the stillness of the mind, she felt herself slip away, into nothingness. When the storm finally passed, and the first rays of dawn pierced through the clouds above Grayswood, the village was silent. The creatures that had once walked the earth, twisted by the blood rain, were gone. The land, too, seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, as if the curse had finally lifted, leaving behind only the ruins of what had once been. And so the blood rain ended. But this story, like so many others, is not real.